Okay, so imagining that I'm in an unseen literature exam and I've been given the passage in front of us here, this is how I'd go about explicating the passage and preparing myself to write an essay. The prompt says, write an essay analyzing the following passage. Discuss its significance in the play Romeo and Juliet and focus on how diction, tone, mood, structure, and other literary devices all affect meaning. Well, right away, I can see the passage is a conversation between Romeo and Juliet, and based on the fact that it's 14 lines, I can tell that it's the sonnet that they speak at the end of Act 1. So I already kind of know where I'm at in the play, and I'm ready to go. I want to make sure I understand what the question's asking for. It says, discuss the significance in the play, so I need to relate this back to context. Now, the context in the play is basically the end of Act 1. That's where this takes place. And I might want to make note to myself that the reason why this is important is because it's Romeo and Juliet's first conversation, right? And so that's why it's important in the play. We need to know that before this happened, we had Tybalt threatening to take revenge on Romeo later after he was put in his place by his uncle. We also need to know that, of course, Romeo was actually in love with Rosalind before this point. And so this conversation is important to fortify in the audience's minds the fact that they really are truly in love. Or is he just a fickle boy who's now, in love with someone new? Or as Friar Lawrence says, love is not truly in a person's heart, but in his eyes. Anyways, so I need to keep all that in mind. And I also need to keep in mind that it's important later on because it's what makes Romeo, of course, it leads to the balcony scene. Directly after this. So that's the context. That's what's happening around when this particular conversation is spoken. So I just want to keep that in mind. The question also says, focus on how diction, tone, mood, structure, and other literary devices affect the meaning. So right away I just want to make sure I remember diction is word choice. Fair enough. I'm obviously going to be looking at word choices throughout this passage. I remember that there was a lot of religious imagery, and so I'm going to look at that. The tone, in this case, I'm thinking, that of course means attitude. The attitude taken by Romeo and the attitude taken by Juliet in this passage would probably be what I need to focus on. The mood, and that's like the background ambiance. And it's interesting because, of course, Tybalt, is threatening violence in the background. So the mood is interesting because there's some tension in the play on stage, but for Romeo and Juliet, they're oblivious to that tension, and so the mood's going to be a little complicated, and I'm going to need to keep that in mind. The structure, of course, we got a sonnet. I need to pay attention to everything that goes along with the sonnet and how that might affect the meaning. And other literary devices, well, obviously Shakespeare loves to use metaphors and puns and all sorts of things. So metaphors, puns, oxymorons. Are any of these in here or not? And I remember that there's definitely a pun at the end, so I'm just getting myself ready. Okay, so now I need to go through and explicate. It says, if I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, that the gentle fine is this, my lips to blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Well, first I just want to make sure it's hand and stand and this and kiss, and it's a sonnet, and that's a quatrain. So I should analyze this quatrain by quatrain, because that's what Mr. Cook taught me. So I'm going to begin with some of the word choices. He says, if I profane with my unworthiest hand, and in other words, he says, if I've done something wrong, if I've sinned with my unworthiest hand by touching your holy shrine, which of course in this metaphor is Juliet's hand, right? The gentle fine is this. So he says, I should be fined for this. But the fine, he says, is a kiss later on. So he's leading up to this idea that he's going to try to kiss her hand. But the kiss is equal to the punishment here. He says, my lips two blushing pilgrims ready stand. Now the two blushing pilgrims, of course, gets us this idea of his lips being blushing, which means that they're sensual and everything goes on with two lips kissing. And so but it's also this idea that they're pilgrims. So he's relating it back to a holy pilgrimage. And he's using all this religious imagery. Basically, he's saying like he's come to her shrine to, he's seeking salvation. that he's going to have some sort of transcendent experience or something through her. So it's a very powerful metaphor, and it might even be a little over the top. He says, "My lips two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss." And so there is that kiss idea. That's what he's going to punish himself with for having profaned her holy shrine. Okay, so we get the first quatrain. Romeo is putting on his Mac really hard here, and typically a teenage girl's response to this would be like, ooh, get away, or what are you talking about, or I didn't understand half of what you said. But Juliet rises to the occasion immediately and says, "Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much. Which mannerly devotion shows in this? For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss." So she jumps right onto his metaphor and says, well, if you're a good pilgrim, right, then you do wrong your hand too much, right? In other words, it's not profane for you to touch my hand. There's nothing wrong with that. She says, which mannerly devotion shows in this? For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch. For saints have hands, that's of course Juliet. The pilgrim's hands do touch, that's of course Romeo. And palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. And so she twists the idea of him touching his lips to her hand with no, but it's okay to hold our hands together, and basically in a prayer. So she says that's how a good pilgrim would come and pray at a holy shrine. And so she sort of twists his words on him. And of course we got much and touch and this and kiss. So we got CD rhyme scheme, and she gets the second quatrain, and essentially she kind of says no, you're not going to get to kiss my hand. You should behave, and we'll just instead hold our hands together like good saints and good pilgrims. And then Romeo says, "Oh, have not saints lips and holy palmers too?" So he basically says, well, what about lips? And then Juliet says, "I, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer." And so this idea that lips and that they're supposed to basically prayer versus kissing. So they're playing a little cat and mouse game, which is typical in courting, right? She's kind of playing hard to get. He's trying to get her, and he's kind of playing with language to try and seduce her. But Juliet's, rising to the occasion. We got the second half of this quatrain, which is, "Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair." So basically, lips and hands, he's like, why don't we let them, pray, as in, pray equals touching our hands together, so let's let our lips touch together. And he says, lest faith turn to despair. And lest, of course, is, unless faith will turn to despair, or my faith will turn to despair if you don't let me, kiss you. And so it goes back to this religious metaphor. Basically, again, he's looking for salvation, and he's saying you can't churn me away from your church because I will turn to despair. I'll lose my faith, right? So basically, in this case, he's saying, Juliet, you equal my religion. So it's mildly blasphemous, but it's also really powerful because he's really saying you're my everything, and he's just met her. And of course, it might be hard for people to believe, but good actors who portraying this can really sell it, right? So we got, by the way, let's do a rhyme scheme: E, do, and to, and then prayer and despair. So we got E, F, E, F. Okay, so we got 3 quatrains, right? 1, 2, 3. Right, so we got Q1, Q2, Q3, just keeping track, and that might be important to talk about when I'm talking about the structure. All right, so then we get to the final couplet, and Juliet says, "Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake." And in this case, she's saying move as in emotionally move, right? She says they don't get emotional for anything except for prayer's sake. Basically, she's trying to say, cool your jets, calm down there, tiger. You're not supposed to be emotionally moved if you're supposedly a pilgrim who's come to worship at my shrine. And so, and if I'm a saint, then I'm not going to be emotionally moved either. And then Romeo says, "Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take." And he puns, but it's, he twists the meaning of this homophone. He says, "Move not," as in, physically move, right? So it ends with that play on words, "while my prayer's effect I take." And then we know that he kisses her, and they end up swapping sin later, right? So we got E, F, E, F, G, G. And then, of course, talking about context, right? Immediately after this, they end up, swapping sin. She says, "Oh, have my lips the sin that they have took." And he says, oh no, I don't want to give you my sin, so you better give it back. And then they pretend, basically they start making out right before the nurse interrupts them, right? So that's all important for context as well, all right? Now, we've definitely looked at the word choice. We were getting the religious imagery. We've definitely seen the attitude, the cat and mouse game that's being played between Romeo and Juliet. We know the mood. In the background, it's a little sinister with Tybalt, but for these two, the mood is one of absolute, almost religious salvation, religious a religious sort of moment. And then you get the structure is obvious throughout the whole piece, and they're finishing each other's thoughts, and that's a fairly sophisticated thing. If this were to happen in between two people naturally, it'd be pretty profound. And Shakespeare wants it to seem that way, whether or not it's reasonable or not. He wants you to believe that these two are meant for each other. They truly are. Oh yeah, don't forget that, star-crossed lovers. Okay, so now I'm ready. I'm ready to go ahead and start outlining my essay, which I'm going to do. And since I might have limited paper, I might just want to flip this over and start outlining right there. And I know that I'm going to do my intro. And I'm going to need to do my intro involves a hook, it involves background, it involves a thesis, right? And then I know I need to do body 1, body 2, body 3, and I'm going to need to do a conclusion. And I might have more body paragraphs, I don't know, but generally that's a good safe place to start, right? So I'm just doing a basic outline, The conclusion, I know I'm supposed to answer that, so what question, which means I need to go back to the theme. And we didn't really talk about theme at this point, but the themes here seem to be, true love and fate. And that's maybe what I'm going to get into. So this is a basic outline. I'm going to fill in the blanks in the next video.